She did not cry. That was the first thing everyone remembered afterward, that Caroline Whitaker stood in the middle of a crowded Virginia ballroom in a silk dress her father had worked 20 years to afford, and she did not shed a single tear. Nathaniel Ashford leaned close, whispered something cold and deliberate into her ear, and smiled like a man who had never once been told no. And Caroline curtsied slowly, perfectly, like a woman burying a man alive with manners, then walked out without looking back. By the end of that week, she had bought the estate next door to his. If this story hit something real in you, subscribe to this channel, follow Caroline's story all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far the tale has traveled. The Hargrove Ball was the finest event of the Virginia summer season, and everyone who mattered in the county had come to be seen. Candles burned in long rows above the dancing floor. Women moved in pale silks and dark muslins, and men stood in clusters near the windows watching the room with the careful attention of people whose opinions could make or ruin a name by Sunday morning. Caroline Whitaker had not wanted to come. She had said so to her father twice on the carriage ride over, and Thomas Whitaker had answered her both times with the same patient silence that meant he understood completely and did not intend to change his mind. He was a broad-shouldered man with rough hands and a steady gaze, a former dock worker from Baltimore who had spent 30 years turning labor and risk and stubbornness into one of the most profitable shipping and iron operations on the eastern seaboard. He had not done all of that, so his daughter could spend the summer season avoiding county balls. "You belong in every room you walk into," he told her as the carriage slowed. "Don't you let anybody convince you otherwise." Caroline smoothed the front of her dress and said nothing. She was 24 years old. She had been managing her father's accounts since she was 17. She could read a contract faster than most lawyers, identify a fraudulent ledger entry in under a minute, and negotiate freight terms that made grown men sweat through their collars. None of that would matter tonight. Tonight, she was merchant blood in a room full of old names, and she knew exactly how that was received in Virginia in the summer of 1816. The room opened up around her when she entered the way rooms did, a shift in attention, a pause in conversation, the particular silence that was not welcome, but assessment. She kept her chin level and her expression pleasant, because she had learned early that the most powerful thing she could do in a room that was trying to diminish her was refuse to be diminished. She met 3 county wives who spoke to her with bright, careful smiles that said nothing real. She was introduced to 2 magistrates who shook her hand and then looked past her shoulder. She stood near the edge of the dancing floor and watched the room move, and she told herself this was fine. This was expected. This was simply the price of being new money among old names. Then Elias Crowell materialized at her left elbow. Mr. Crowell was the county magistrate, the town's most reliable source of whispered information, and a man who had built his entire social identity on knowing things about other people and deploying that knowledge at the most damaging possible moment. He was 60 years old and had the satisfied look of someone who had never once questioned whether his opinions were worth having. "Miss Whitaker," he said with the particular warmth of a man about to say something unkind. "How delightful. I heard your father's wagons nearly blocked the county road again this week. Shipping business must be doing well." "Very well, Mr. Crowell," Caroline said. "Thank you for your concern." "Not concern, my dear. Observation." He smiled. "Though I do think your father might consider, but here comes Ashford. You really must meet Ashford." She had, of course, already heard of Nathaniel Ashford. Everyone had. He was 32 years old, the sole heir of Ashford Hall, one of the oldest estates in the county, and he carried the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having been told that his presence somewhere might be questioned. He was tall. He was handsome in the way that men with very old names sometimes were, like the land itself had decided to put on a coat and walk around. Half the women in the county were quietly in love with him. The other half were too sensible and were also quietly in love with him. He moved through the room with the particular ease of a man who owned it, which in a certain sense he did, or believed he did, and when Crowell waved him over, he came with the relaxed attention of someone who found everything he encountered mildly interesting and nothing especially important. Ashford Crowell said, "Miss Caroline Whitaker, Whitaker Shipping and Iron out of Baltimore. Her father's company has been quite active in county trade recently. Nathaniel looked at her. It was the kind of look that took a person apart and put them back together in a different order. Not cruel exactly, but evaluating in a way that was its own kind of dismissal. He looked at her silk dress and her steady eyes and her father's money, made visible in the careful quality of everything she wore, and she could see him categorizing her before he had said a word. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "I believe I've seen your father's wagons on the county road." "Most people have," she said pleasantly. "They're fairly large." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement maybe that she had some wit. "Your father's built quite a business. Baltimore to Virginia in what a decade? 23 years, Caroline said. He started on the docks." "Is that so?" Not a question. A note. She held his gaze. "It is." "Well." He reached for a glass from a passing tray, unhurried, unbothered. "I suppose commerce has its own kind of momentum." The word commerce landed the way he intended it to, with a slight pause before it, with the faint implication that commerce was a perfectly fine thing for commerce to concern itself with, but that it had its own proper rooms, and this was not necessarily one of them. Caroline smiled. "The Ashford Hall roof beams were purchased through my father's timber contracts, I believe. 18 months ago, if I'm recalling correctly." The shift in his face was small but real. A tightening at the jaw. A fractional stillness that meant she had touched something he had not expected to be touched. "My father keeps thorough records," she added pleasantly. Nathaniel set his glass down. He looked at her with an expression that was no longer evaluating, but something sharper, something that had been inconvenienced and was choosing how to respond. Around them she was aware that Crowell had gone very quiet, and that two women nearby had tilted their heads in the specific direction of people trying not to appear to be listening. When he spoke quietly. That was the thing she remembered most afterward, that he did not need to raise his voice. He leaned slightly toward her, the way a man does when he wants what he says to land privately and precisely, and he said, "Money may buy you silk, Miss Whitaker, but it will never buy you breeding. Know your place." Then he straightened, picked up his glass, and turned to speak to someone behind him, as though she had already ceased to exist. The room did not go silent. That was not how these things worked. The room simply continued around her music movement, laughter, the scrape of shoes on a polished floor, and Caroline stood inside all of it, and felt the words settle into her, like something cold, dropped into still water. She breathed. She did not cry. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of Elias Crowell's alert little eyes and the half-turned heads of women who would be recounting this exact moment at breakfast tomorrow. She curtsied. It was a perfect curtsy. Deep, controlled, absolutely correct. The kind of curtsy a woman gives when she wants the movement itself to say everything her mouth cannot. She held it for one beat longer than necessary. Then she rose, kept her face smooth and calm, and walked directly toward the door. She heard Crowell say something behind her. She heard a woman laugh soft and sharp. She stepped out of the ballroom and into the night air, and she stood very still for a long moment with her hands loose at her sides, and she did not shake, and she did not weep, and she told herself what she had always told herself when a room tried to make her feel like she did not belong in it. "Good. Now you know what you're working with." Her father was waiting by the carriage. He took one look at her face and said nothing, which was how Thomas Whitaker expressed that he understood something completely. On the ride back, Caroline said, "I need the property maps for the county, the ones with the estate boundaries." He looked at her in the darkness of the carriage. "All right," he said. She was awake past 2 in the morning with a lantern and a rolled map spread across the writing desk in her room, her finger tracing the boundary lines east of Ashford Hall. The property records were thorough. Her father had always believed in thorough records, and she found what she was looking for inside the first half hour. Hawthorne Ridge, 240 acres directly adjacent to Ashford Hall's eastern border. A colonial-era estate that had passed through 3 owners in the last 15 years, each of them undercapitalized, each of them unable to sustain the cost of repair and operation. The current holder had stopped paying county taxes 18 months ago. The property was in arrears. The house was abandoned. The fields had gone to seed. It was for sale. The asking price was low enough to be an embarrassment, and high enough that most people in the county could not meet it without strain. Caroline could meet it by Thursday. She sat back in her chair and looked at the map for a long time. She thought about Nathaniel Ashford's voice, quiet and precise and completely certain of itself. She thought about the words "know your place" and the way he had turned away before she could answer, as though her answer had never been a real possibility. She thought, all right. She thought, you want me to know my place? Then let me show you exactly where it is. She wrote 3 letters before she went to sleep. One to the county property office requesting confirmation of the sale status. One to her father's solicitor in Baltimore requesting a transfer of funds. One to the caretaker listed in the property record, a man named Hiram Cole, informing him that she would be coming to inspect the property on Saturday morning and asking him to have the gates unlocked. She sealed all 3, set them on the edge of the desk, to be sent at first light, and went to bed. She slept soundly. She almost always slept soundly when she had a plan. By Saturday afternoon, Hawthorne Ridge belonged to Caroline Whitaker. The news moved through the county the way news always moved, faster than a horse and considerably less dignified. By Sunday service, it had reached the church steps. By Monday, it had reached the general store. The feed merchant, the 2 women who served as the county's primary distribution network for anything anyone had said or done or purchased in the last week. By Tuesday morning, it had reached Nathaniel Ashford. He heard it from his stable hand, who had heard it from his cousin, who worked for the county property office, and had processed the deed transfer himself on Friday. The stable hand delivered the information with the particular care of someone sharing news he suspects his employer is not going to receive well, which was accurate. Nathaniel stood in the yard of Ashford Hall, with his hands very still at his sides, and he looked east toward the line of trees that marked the boundary of his property, and beyond them, the beginning of Hawthorne Ridge. "She bought it," he said. "Yes, sir." "The whole property?" "Deed transferred Friday, sir. County records show Miss Caroline Whitaker, Baltimore, Maryland, as sole." "I heard you." He dismissed the stable hand and stood there a while longer, looking at the tree line. He thought about the ball. He thought about the curtsy, that long, deliberate, absolutely correct curtsy, and the way she had walked out of the room without once looking back. He thought, this is spite. He thought, this is a merchant girl with too much money and a wounded pride, and she will last 6 weeks out here before the reality of managing a ruined estate drives her back to Baltimore. He was wrong. He would not know for some time how wrong he was, but the wrongness of it was already in motion, moving toward him with the quiet certainty of a woman who had been awake until 2 in the morning, with a lantern and a map and a set of very sharp plans. Caroline arrived at Hawthorne Ridge the following Monday in a work dress and boots with a hired surveyor. 3 carpenters from the county seat, a roofer her father had used in Baltimore, and Hiram Cole, the elderly caretaker who had stayed on through the property's various failed owners with the stubborn loyalty of a man who simply could not bring himself to leave a place he had tended for 30 years. Hiram met her at the gate. He was 70 weathered, and had the expression of a man who had been disappointed by property owners before and was conserving his optimism. "Miss Whitaker," he said. "Mr. Cole." She looked at the gate. One hinge was broken. The post was rotted at the base. "How long has this hinge been gone?" "2 winters, miss. We'll fix it today." She looked past him at the long drive, the collapsed section of fence along the north side, the house with its sagging porch, and the dark stain spreading from the roof line on the east wing. "I'll want a full inventory of everything that needs repair in order of urgency. Structural first, then water damage, then everything else. Can you do that?" Hiram looked at her for a moment with the careful attention of a man recalibrating his expectations. "Yes, miss, I can do that." "Good." She moved through the gate. "Let's get started." The survey took 3 days. The inventory Hiram produced was long and precise, and in several places genuinely alarming. 3 sections of roof needed full replacement. The east wing had water damage down to the subflooring. The main well had gone alkaline and would need to be capped, and a new one dug on the south side. The north fencing was gone in 4 places, where deer had broken through and simply not been pushed back. 2 of the tenant cottages on the far fields had roofs that would not survive another winter. Caroline read through the entire inventory at the kitchen table on the 3rd evening, making notes in the margins, calculating costs, reorganizing priorities, and she felt not happy exactly, but something that was the working version of happy, focused, useful, purposeful. Her mind moving the way it moved best when there was a real problem in front of it. She rolled her sleeves up and got to work. Hammers started before sunrise that Thursday. The noise reached Ashford Hall within 2 days. It was not a dramatic arrival. It was the persistent early morning percussion of carpentry work being done by people who intended to finish it, the strike of hammers, the drag of lumber, the shouts of men coordinating across a work site. It carried through the still morning air with the indifference of sound that does not know or care who might be listening. Nathaniel heard it from his bedroom window on the 2nd morning. He stood there for a long moment in the early light, and the muscle at his jaw worked once, and he went downstairs and ate breakfast in silence. By the end of the 1st week, Caroline's wagons had begun using the shared county road that ran along the boundary of both properties, the road that technically served both estates, but had in practical terms been used almost exclusively by Ashford Hall's tenant farmers for the past decade. The wagons were large, loaded with lumber and roofing material and gravel, and they churned the soft summer road into ruts. Nathaniel's head tenant farmer, a steady man named Willis, came to him on Friday and said respectfully that the road had become difficult. Nathaniel rode out to the boundary lane on Saturday morning. Caroline was standing in the middle of the road. She was directing traffic 2 wagons coming in from the north, one going out to the south, and a third that had gotten its rear wheel into a rut and needed redirecting with the calm efficiency of a woman who did this kind of thing regularly. Her dress was practical. Her hair was pinned back without ceremony, and she had mud on her boots up past the ankle. She saw him coming. She waited. "Miss Whittaker," he said from horseback, with the tone of a man who had rehearsed a reasonable opening and was sticking to it. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "your wagons have damaged the lane." "My wagons are using a county road," she said, "which they are legally entitled to do. The road serves my tenant farms. The road serves both properties." She looked up at him with the particular patience of someone who has already thought through all the arguments the other person is about to make. "I am happy to contribute to gravel and maintenance costs if that's your concern. I plan to do so regardless." He looked at her. The mud on her boots, the rope she was holding to help redirect the stuck wagon. The men working around her who moved with the easy efficiency of a crew that was being well managed. "This is a gentleman's county," he said, and he heard even as he said it that it was a smaller thing to say than he had intended. "Not a construction yard." Caroline tilted her head. "No, Mr. Ashford," she said. "It's a county where half the estates are quietly falling apart because the people who own them have names and no money. I'm just the one who said it out loud." A beat. "And who's doing something about it?" She turned back to the stuck wagon. "Get your shoulder into it, Mr. Cole," she called. "Together now, there we go." The wagon rolled free. The men moved. The road cleared. Nathaniel sat on his horse for another moment, then turned and rode back toward Ashford Hall without speaking again. He did not know what to do with her. That was the problem. He had expected wounded pride and a short investment. He had expected retreat. He had not expected rolled sleeves and supply wagons, and a woman who quoted county road law from memory and turned her back on him to redirect a wagon before he had finished speaking. He told himself it was irritating. He was not yet ready to call it anything else. 3 weeks into the work at Hawthorne Ridge, a summer storm came through the county overnight and brought down one of the oldest oaks on the boundary line, a tree wide enough that 2 men could not reach around it, and heavy enough that when it fell across the shared road, it came down like a door closing on a room. By morning, the road was completely blocked. Willis came to report it before breakfast. Nathaniel went out to look. The tree was massive. Moving it would take a team chains and several hours of coordinated work. He did not have chains of that weight at Ashford Hall. He had an axe and the considerable stubbornness of a man who did not like asking for things. He took the axe. He started working. He had been at it for 2 hours. The wood was dense. The summer heat was already building, and he had made a respectable cut, but not nearly enough when he heard boots on the road behind him. Caroline walked up beside him, looked at the tree, looked at him, and looked at the axe. "You're going to be there until Thursday," she said. "I'll manage. Your tenant families need that road open by afternoon. The feed delivery comes Thursdays from the county store. If they miss it, Mrs. Willis is short on meal until next week." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and flipped it open. Nathaniel stared at her. "I have 2 logging chains and a 6-horse team at Hawthorne Ridge right now. I can have that tree moved in 2 hours. He said nothing. She waited, he was beginning to understand something she was very good at. "You keep records on my tenant deliveries," he said finally. "I keep records on everything that shares the road with my property." She closed the notebook. "Do you want the chains or not?" The silence between them lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. "Yes," he said. She sent a boy back to Hawthorne Ridge at a run. The logging team arrived in 40 minutes. By noon, the road was clear. Nathaniel watched her workers move with the precision of people who had been given good direction and fair pay, and he stood with his axe in his hand, and something in his chest moved in a way he did not immediately have a name for. She did not gloat. She directed the clearing, thanked her men by name, checked the road surface after, and was already walking back toward Hawthorne Ridge before he could say anything. He called after her. "Miss Whitaker." She paused, turned. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was not warm exactly, but it had opened some careful quality, had eased slightly, some held thing had shifted. "The road serves both of us," she said. "That's all." She turned and walked back to her estate. Nathaniel stood in the cleared road for a long while, the axe still in his hand, the summer heat pressing down on his shoulders, and he thought that he was possibly in some important respects wrong about her. He was not certain yet, but the certainty with which he had dismissed her was no longer quite as solid as it had been 3 weeks ago. And that, in its own quiet way, was the beginning of everything. The cleared road did not make them neighbors. Not really. Not yet. What it made them was aware of each other in a way that was different from before. Less like 2 people arguing across a fence, and more like 2 people who had touched the same rope in a crisis and could not entirely forget the feeling. Nathaniel rode his boundary line more than he used to. Caroline noticed, though she did not say so. She had a way of noticing things and filing them without reaction, the way a good accountant notes a discrepancy and waits to see if it resolves itself or becomes a problem. The work at Hawthorne Ridge did not slow down. If anything, it accelerated. The roofers finished the east wing by the 2nd week of July and moved immediately to the main structure. The new well came in clean and cold on a Thursday, which made Hiram Cole smile for the first time since Caroline had arrived, a brief, genuine thing that she recorded privately as one of the better moments of the summer. The north fencing went up in sections, each one measured twice, and set deep, because she had learned early that the most expensive mistake in property repair was work that had to be done twice. The county watched all of this with the divided attention of people who had not yet decided how to feel about it. There were those who admired her openly, the tenant families along the shared road, who had found gravel laid in the worst ruts one morning without anyone announcing it, and who understood immediately who had sent it. Willis's wife, who had received her Thursday feed delivery without interruption, and had sent a jar of preserved peaches to the Hawthorne Ridge kitchen in wordless thanks. The county surveyor, who had worked with Caroline for 3 days and told his wife she was the most precise client he had ever had, which he meant as the highest possible compliment, and she would have received it the same way. And then there were those who watched with their arms crossed and their mouths ready. Elias Crowell was not a man who forgave the feeling of being made irrelevant, and Caroline's arrival in the county had made him feel precisely that. She did not need his introductions. She did not need his approval. She did not pay social calls or seek his opinion, or show any of the careful deference that Crowell had come to understand as his due from anyone who wanted to move smoothly through the county's social architecture. She simply arrived, worked, and thrived, and this offended him in the deep, unreasonable way that competent women had always offended men whose power depended on other people's uncertainty. He began saying things. Nothing direct. Crowell was never direct. But things found their way into parlors and pew conversations. That the Whitaker girl was making a spectacle. That it wasn't natural a young woman alone on a working estate, no chaperone to speak of ordering men around like a foreman. That Thomas Whitaker had raised his daughter to forget the difference between a counting house and a drawing room, and wasn't that just typical of Baltimore money? Caroline heard these things the way sound travels through walls, muffled but unmistakable. She did not respond to them directly. She had learned a long time ago that the most devastating answer to that kind of talk was simply to keep working and let the results speak at a volume Crowell could not match. But it wore on her. She would not have admitted that to anyone, but it wore on her in the private hours in the evenings when the work crews had gone and the house was quiet, and she sat at her writing desk with the accounts and felt the particular loneliness of a person who is doing something right and being punished for it anyway. She wrote to her father every week. He wrote back short, practical letters in his square dock worker's hand full of shipping news and Baltimore weather, and the occasional sentence that was really about something else entirely. One letter arrived in the third week of July that said, among other things, "The people who talk the most are usually the ones doing the least. You always knew that. Don't forget it now." She folded the letter and put it in the desk drawer and went back to the accounts, and did not feel lonely for at least another 4 days. It was during that same week that Nathaniel Ashford's tenant situation became something she could no longer ignore. She had known in the abstract that Ashford Hall was not prospering. The property records had suggested it, and the condition of the shared road before she improved it had confirmed it a thriving estate did not let its primary supply road rot for 2 winters. But the specific shape of the problem announced itself to her on a Tuesday morning when she was walking the east boundary of Hawthorne Ridge and came across Margaret Holt. Margaret was 40, the wife of one of Ashford's tenant farmers, and she was sitting on the low stone wall that marked the property line with a child on her knee, and an expression that belonged to a woman who was very tired and had stopped pretending otherwise. Caroline almost walked past, but something in the quality of the woman's stillness stopped her. "Mrs. Holt," she said. Margaret looked up. "Miss Whitaker." A pause. "I ain't trespassing. This is the county wall." "I know," Caroline said. "I wasn't going to say that." She sat down on the other end of the wall, which surprised Margaret visibly. Caroline looked at the child, a girl maybe 4, asleep against her mother's shoulder, with the total confidence of small children in arms they trust, and said nothing for a moment. "How is the cottage roof holding?" she asked. She had seen it from a distance. She had thought it looked uncertain. Margaret was quiet for a moment that was full of the careful calculation of a woman deciding how much truth was safe to speak. "It held through last week's rain," she said finally. "Lost a section in May. Mr. Ashford didn't repair it. He sent Mr. Willis with materials in June." A short pause. "Willis did what he could. He ain't a roofer." Caroline nodded slowly. She was thinking about the inventory Hiram had given her. She was thinking about costs and timber contracts, and the particular kind of pride that made a man send an unqualified tenant to patch a roof rather than admit he couldn't afford a proper roofer. She was thinking about 6 tenant families on the eastern edge of Ashford Hall, whose roofs she had seen at varying distances, and she was running numbers in her head with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing it since she was 17. "If I sent my roofers over," she said carefully, "would Mr. Ashford accept that?" Margaret looked at her with an expression that mixed hope and skepticism in equal parts. "That ain't my place to say, miss." "No," Caroline agreed. "It isn't." She went home and wrote a letter. It was a short letter, businesslike with no sentiment in it. She wrote that her roofing crew was finishing their work at Hawthorne Ridge and would have time available the following week. She wrote that she had observed what appeared to be repair needs at several of the eastern tenant cottages. She wrote that she was prepared to send the crew at her own cost as a gesture of neighborly good faith. She sealed it and sent it to Ashford Hall. The answer came back the same afternoon, delivered by one of Ashford's stable boys, with the awkward urgency of someone carrying a message that had been written in irritation. The letter was short. The handwriting was sharp and compressed the way handwriting gets when the person holding the pen is annoyed. Miss Whittaker, my tenant's welfare is my own concern, and has been adequately attended to. Your offer is declined. N. Ashford. Caroline read it twice. She set it on the desk. She said quietly, and to no one, "You stubborn, prideful, impossible man." Then she folded the letter, put it in the drawer with her father's letters, and went back to work. But she did not forget the look on Margaret Holt's face. And she did not forget the roof. 3 days later, she was at the county lumber merchant, settling an account, when she overheard two men talking near the doorway. She was not trying to listen. She simply had very good ears, and the room was not large. One of the men was a builder she recognized from the county seat. The other she did not know. They were talking without particular discretion about the Ashford Hall situation. What she heard was this: the debt was not small. It was not the manageable kind of debt that a good summer's harvest could address. It was the compounding kind, the kind that had been passed down alongside the estate itself, inherited with the silver, and the name and the reputation accumulating interest, through 2 generations of men who had maintained appearances at the cost of maintaining books. The specific number mentioned was large enough that she stopped writing in her account ledger for a moment. She paid her bill and left without speaking. She rode back to Hawthorne Ridge in the kind of silence that was not peace, but calculation. She thought he insulted me at a ball because her father's money had bought his roof beams. He insulted me because my father worked on the docks, and his grandfather had a portrait in the front hall. He insulted me because I made him feel exposed, and he didn't know any other way to respond to that feeling except to push down on whoever was nearest. She thought that doesn't excuse it. She thought, but it explains it. And then she thought with the particular clearness that came to her when she stopped being angry and started being practical. There is a way to fix this that helps everyone. And there is a way to fix this that satisfies spite. And those are not the same thing, and I need to decide which one I am actually interested in. She did not reach a decision that evening. But the question stayed with her patient and specific the way important questions do. The crisis, when it came, arrived on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of July, and it arrived in the shape of a wagon. Caroline was at her desk when Hiram knocked and told her that Willis was at the gate asking to speak with her. She went out, and Willis Nathaniel's head tenant, steady and careful, and not a man who came to her door lightly, stood with his hat in his hands and told her directly and without preamble that the Ashford Hall East barn had developed a structural problem overnight, and that if it came down, it would take the summer grain storage with it. "Mr. Ashford's in the South Fields," Willis said. "He don't know yet. And I, Miss Whittaker, I came to you because I know you've got the crew, and I know you know how to move fast, and I know Mr. Ashford is going to be angry that I did it, and I'm coming anyway." Caroline was already moving. "Get my foreman," she told Hiram. "Tell him bring the team and the support timbers, now." She was through the gate and onto the Ashford Hall East grounds in 12 minutes, moving ahead of her crew, because she had learned that the first thing you did with a structural problem was look at it yourself before you decided what it needed. The barn was old. The main support beam on the south wall had cracked. She could see the split from 20 feet away, a dark diagonal line across the grain that meant it had been weakening for some time and had finally given way under the weight of the summer storage above it. The wall was leaning. Not dramatically, not yet, but with the quiet inevitability of something that had made up its mind. She went in. Her foreman caught her arm. "Miss Whittaker, I need to see the beam. I know what it could do." She looked at him steadily. "Come with me then." They went in together. She assessed. She came back out. Her crew was arriving with the support timbers, and she directed them fast. 3 timbers to prop the south wall brace from the floor. "Up angle. It here, not there. Hold the weight." While we get something permanent in, and they moved because she was clear, and they trusted her to be right, and she needed them to trust her to be right because she was not entirely certain she was. The wall held. It was 40 minutes of the kind of work that makes everything in the chest very quiet, where the mind goes narrow and focused, and there is nothing except the problem directly in front of it. Then the support timbers were in the wall had stopped moving, and her foreman let out a long breath and said, "That'll hold till we get a proper replacement beam." "Order it today," she said. "Have it here tomorrow, Miss Whitaker." He looked at her with the expression of a man about to say something practical that she might not want to hear. "This is Ashford property." "I know." "He's going to." "I know," she said again. "Order the beam." She was standing outside the barn, her dress dusty and her hair coming loose at the back when she heard the horse. Nathaniel came fast across the east field, riding the way people ride when they've been told something is wrong and haven't had time to prepare themselves for what wrong looks like. He pulled up outside the barn and took in the scene. Caroline, her crew, the support timbers visible through the open doors, the foreman with a pencil and a materials list, and his face went through several things in rapid succession. He dismounted. He looked at Caroline. "Willis came to me," she said before he could speak. The beam had cracked. The wall was going. He looked past her at the barn, at the timbers, at the wall that was still standing. "You came onto my property," he said. "Yes." "Without my permission." There wasn't time to ask. She held his gaze. "Your summer grain was about to come down, Mr. Ashford, and with it your tenant family's food supply for the next 4 months." The silence between them was the kind that had weight. Nathaniel looked at the barn for a long time. She watched his jaw work, watched him do the particular internal calculation of a proud man confronting the fact that someone he had dismissed had just saved something he could not afford to lose. "What's the damage?" he said finally. "Not a question exactly. An opening. The main south beam needs full replacement. The timbers we've put in will hold it stable for 2, maybe 3 days. After that..." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Her foreman had sketched it out while she was inside. "My crew can do the replacement tomorrow if you want them to. Materials cost, I can have the figures to you by this evening." He took the paper. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Why?" he said. It was a single word, but she understood the whole question inside it. She thought of Margaret Holt on the stone wall with a child on her shoulder and an expression of exhausted honesty. She thought of Willis with his hat in his hands at her gate, coming to her because he needed help and he knew she would give it. She thought of 6 families on the eastern edge of this property who did not get to have pride about it. "Because Willis came into me," she said. "And because your tenants needed it done." A pause. "And because I am a better neighbor than you have been to me." That landed. She saw it land. She had not said it cruelly, she had said it the way she said most things, which was directly and without decoration. But it landed in him somewhere real, somewhere that had been waiting for exactly that kind of honest accounting. He did not apologize, not then. She had not expected him to. But when she turned to go, he said her name. "Miss Whitaker." She stopped. "The materials cost," he said. "Send me the figures tonight. I'll have the payment to you by morning." She nodded once. She walked back toward the boundary line without looking back. Behind her, she heard Nathaniel say something to her foreman in a low voice. She heard her foreman answer. She heard the sound of 2 men talking about a structural problem with the mutual respect of people who both know what they're looking at. And she felt something ease slightly in her chest that she had not known was tight. That evening, she sent the figures. She charged him fairly, not generously, not spitefully, but the actual cost of the materials and the labor, because that was the kind of transaction she could stand behind. She sent it with a brief note that said the replacement beam could be done by noon tomorrow if he confirmed by morning. His reply came an hour later. Confirmed. N. Ashford. 2 words. No warmth. But also she noticed no argument. She put the letter in the drawer with the others and went to bed, and she lay in the dark and thought about the way he had said why that single flat word, with the whole complicated question inside it. And she thought that Nathaniel Ashford was starting to see her, and that seeing was going to be more dangerous for both of them than the fighting had been. She was not wrong about that. She was rarely wrong about the things that mattered, which was both her great strength and occasionally her burden. The summer deepened. The days got longer and hotter, and full of the particular weight of Virginia July, and the work at Hawthorne Ridge continued, and the work at Ashford Hall continued beside it, and the boundary line between them got quieter, and the silence between them changed its quality, less hostile, more watchful. The way two people sound when they have started paying close attention to each other and haven't yet decided what to do about it. They crossed paths 3 more times that week alone. Once at the county lumber merchant, where they arrived simultaneously and conducted their transactions with elaborate politeness and no wasted words. Once on the shared road, where he was supervising fence repair and she was returning from a supplier in the county seat, and they exchanged brief nods that held more acknowledgement than either of them had offered at the ball 3 weeks ago. Once at the county well early morning, where they arrived within 5 minutes of each other and stood in the rising heat while their horses drank, and neither of them spoke, but the silence had gone from tense to something that was almost in its own uncomfortable way companionable. Crowell noticed. Of course Crowell noticed. Crowell noticed everything and assigned it the most convenient meaning available. He said at a small gathering at the county magistrate's house that Friday that it was a shame about young Ashford's situation. Really fine old name, fine old estate, but perhaps not so fine as it had once been if he was taking help from Baltimore merchant money. He said it with the particular compassion of a man who is not compassionate, and it moved through the room the way his words always moved, attaching themselves to people who had no particular reason to disbelieve them. Caroline heard it secondhand by Saturday. She was in the feed store when one of the county wives told her in the careful tone of a woman who thought she was delivering useful information. "Mr. Crowell says you've been doing repair work at Ashford Hall. He says Nathaniel must be in quite a state to accept help from well." "You know how Mr. Crowell says things," Caroline said pleasantly. "I do know, thank you, Mrs. Palmer." She finished her purchase and left. Outside she stood in the sun and felt the anger move through her like weather fast and hot, and then gone, leaving behind something colder and more considered. She thought Crowell is going to keep doing this. He is going to keep taking everything she did and reshaping it into something small or suspect or improper, and he was going to do it until something stopped him. She thought the only thing that stops a man like that is the truth stated publicly by someone he cannot dismiss. She thought she needed an ally, and then she thought, which surprised her because she had not meant to think it, she thought that the person best positioned to be that ally was Nathaniel Ashford himself, if he could find his way past the pride long enough to stand in a room and say what was actually true. She did not know yet if he could do that. She was starting slowly, and against her better judgment, to hope that he could. The week ended. The next one began. The summer moved forward with the steady momentum of things that are already in motion and cannot easily be stopped, and along the shared boundary line of Hawthorne Ridge and Ashford Hall, two people who had started as enemies were becoming, without quite acknowledging it, something considerably more complicated than that. And somewhere in the county, Elias Crowell was already preparing his next move. Crowell's next move came on a Monday, and it came dressed as concern. He filed a formal complaint with the county property office, a document of 6 paragraphs, carefully worded, that raised questions about whether the repair work being conducted across the Ashford Hall boundary constituted unauthorized commercial activity on a residential estate, and whether the shared road improvements had been approved by the proper county authority, and whether the deed transfer for Hawthorne Ridge had been fully verified, given that the previous owner's tax arrears had not been entirely resolved before the sale closed. None of it was true in any way that mattered. All of it was structured so that disproving it would take time and money and the sustained attention of a solicitor, which was precisely the point. Crowell did not need to be right. He needed to be inconvenient. Caroline received the formal notice on Tuesday morning. She read it at her desk, all 6 paragraphs, twice. Then she set it down and sat very still for a moment with her hands flat on the surface of the desk, which was what she did when she was deciding between the reaction she felt and the response she intended. She felt furious. Genuinely, cleanly, bone-deep furious in the way that honest people get when a dishonest one comes at them sideways because he cannot come at them straight. She intended to dismantle every single claim in that document with documented evidence filed in the correct office before Friday. She sent for her father's solicitor in Baltimore that same morning. She wrote 3 letters requesting documentation she already knew existed because she had kept thorough records of everything since the day she bought this property. Because Thomas Whitaker had raised his daughter to keep thorough records of everything. Because he had known from 30 years of building something from nothing, in rooms full of people who did not want him there, that the only protection against a man like Crowell was a paper trail that was longer and cleaner than anything he could produce. The solicitor arrived Thursday. By Friday afternoon, a formal response had been filed, 12 pages fully documented with deed records, tax receipts, county road authorization, and a surveyor's report confirming the exact boundaries of every improvement made on both properties. The county property officer, a quiet man named Aldridge, who had been in his position for 20 years and had very little patience for paperwork generated by personal grudges, reviewed both documents over the weekend and dismissed Crowell's complaint on Monday morning. Crowell was informed by letter. Caroline was informed by letter. The matter was officially closed. What was not closed was Crowell's desire to see her fail. That was the thing about men like him. They did not stop because they were wrong. They stopped because the cost of continuing exceeded what they were willing to pay, and Crowell had not yet reached that calculation. Caroline knew this. She filed the dismissal notice in the desk drawer on top of Nathaniel's 2-word confirmation letter and her father's practical letters, and she went back to work, and she kept her eyes open. It was during the week following the complaint dismissal that things between her and Nathaniel shifted again, not dramatically, not with any announcement, but in the small, precise ways that matter more than dramatic gestures. He came to her gate on a Wednesday afternoon, not on horseback this time. On foot, which she noticed because it was different. Because walking to someone's gate is a different kind of thing than riding. It carries less authority and more intention. He had his hat in his hand, which she also noticed. He did not usually carry his hat in his hand. Hiram showed him through, and Caroline came out from the back of the house where she had been reviewing the new well's output records, and she found Nathaniel Ashford standing in her front yard, looking like a man who had rehearsed something and was no longer certain it was adequate. "Mr. Ashford," she said. "Miss Whitaker." He looked at her steadily. "I heard about Crowell's complaint." "It's been dismissed," she said. "I know." A pause. "I know, because I went to Aldridge's office myself on Saturday and told him that every repair done on this property and on the shared road was conducted with my full knowledge that the boundary work was coordinated between both estates, and that the complaint appeared to be motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate property concern." She stared at him. He held her gaze with the look of a man who has done a difficult thing and is waiting to find out if it was enough. "You went to Aldridge," she said. "Saturday morning." "Before the dismissal?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about what it cost him, not in money, but in the other currency, the one that men like him spent carefully. Going to Aldridge's office and vouching for a woman he had publicly insulted 3 weeks ago in a county where his name was one of the few things he had left that was fully his own. Going there on a Saturday morning before he knew how it would be received, because it was the right thing to do. "Thank you," she said. "It was the least I could do." He said it simply without the clipped formality he usually carried. "It was considerably less than the least I could do, actually." That surprised her into something close to a smile. Not a full one, she was not ready for a full one, but something that moved across her face briefly and honestly. "Do you want to come in?" she asked. "Hiram made coffee this morning. It's probably still adequate." "Just adequate. He's an excellent caretaker," she said. "The coffee is a separate matter." He almost smiled. She saw at the edge of it a real one. Not the polished social expression he wore at county functions, but something smaller and more genuine. He followed her inside. They sat at the kitchen table with Hiram's coffee, which was in fact somewhat better than adequate, And they talked haltingly at first, with the careful attention of two people who were used to having their words used against them and were out of practice with speaking to someone who simply intended to listen. He asked about the well. She told him about the output readings and why the south location had been the correct choice. He asked how she had learned to read well surveys, and she said her father had made her learn everything she might need. And he said that sounded like a demanding education, and she said it was, and she was grateful for every minute of it. He asked about Baltimore. She told him about the harbor and the ironworks and the particular smell of the docks in summer, which was not romantic but was home. And she watched his face while she talked and saw him listening in a way that was not polite but genuine, actually taking in what she said, not waiting for his turn to speak. She asked about Ashford Hall. Not about the debt, she was not ready to put that on the table yet, and neither was he. But about the land itself, the history of it, what it had been before the money ran out. He talked about it differently than he talked about everything else, less carefully, with a real feeling underneath the words. He talked about the east fields in spring, and the particular way the light came through the old maples on the north drive, and she understood that he did not love the name or the portrait in the front hall. He loved the land. That was the thing he was actually protecting, and the pride was just the shell he'd built around it, because he didn't know another way. She filed that away. Quietly, carefully. The way she filed everything that mattered. He left an hour later. He paused at the gate and looked back at her with an expression that was hard to read, complicated, in the way that faces get when someone is processing something that doesn't fit in the categories they've been using. "Miss Whitaker," he said. "Mr. Ashford, I was wrong about you." He said it directly the way he did most things, not embellished, not cushioned. Just the plain statement. "At the ball. I was wrong and I said it to hurt you and I should not have." She looked at him across the yard. "No," she said, "you should not have." She did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right, and she was not a woman who said things were all right when they weren't. But she held his gaze, and she let him carry the weight of it, and she did not add to it, because he was doing the work of accountability honestly, and that deserved to be met honestly. He nodded once. He walked back toward the boundary line. She watched him go, and she thought something has changed. She was not sure yet what to do with that. But she had learned a long time ago that the best thing to do with important information you aren't yet ready to act on was to hold it carefully and wait. The waiting did not last long. The following week brought the kind of heat that July in Virginia produced when it meant business thick, insistent, pressing down on everything with the full weight of a summer that had run out of patience. The creek that ran along the southern boundary of Hawthorne Ridge, which fed into the larger waterway crossing the Ashford Hall East pasture, had been rising for 3 days. Caroline had watched it because she watched everything, and she had said to her foreman on Wednesday that if the rain continued through Thursday, they would need to check the east bank. The rain continued. Thursday morning, Caroline was walking the southern boundary at first light. She did this regularly because boundary knowledge was property knowledge when she heard it. Not a voice exactly. More like the sound of effort, of someone fighting something with their whole body and losing ground. She moved toward the creek bank. Nathaniel was in the water up to his waist. The current was faster than it should have been, fed by 3 days of upstream rain, cold even in July, and it had caught a sheep from one of his east pasture tenant farms, a large one, panicked legs churning uselessly against the pull of the current, wedged against a fallen branch that was the only thing keeping it from going under. He had gone in after it because that was the kind of man he was, not because a sheep was worth the risk, but because it was on his land and it was in trouble, and he could not stand on the bank and watch. He had the animal by the wool at the shoulder. He was braced against the current with both legs, and she could see from the way he was moving that he had been at it for some time and the ground was giving under him. He did not see her yet. She took in the scene in about 3 seconds, the branch, the current's direction, the angle of the bank, the way he was positioned, what the water would do when he lost his footing, which was going to happen in under a minute. She pulled her boots off. She went down the bank. "Give me your hand." He looked up fast. His face went through surprise and then something that was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it, the look of a person who was not going to say they needed help, but was very glad it had arrived. "Get back on the bank. You're losing ground." She was already in the water, the cold of it hitting her like a fist. She reached past him and grabbed the branch the sheep was caught against, bracing her weight against it from the other side. "Push the animal toward me, not the current, toward me." He looked at her for one fraction of a second that contained an entire argument he did not have time to have. Then he pushed. The sheep came free of the current's pull. It scrambled, panicked, found footing in the shallower water near the bank, and hauled itself out with the desperate energy of an animal that had just made peace with death and was furious about it. Caroline was already losing her footing on the creek bed. The water was faster than it looked, and the bottom was slick, and she felt herself go sideways and grabbed for the branch and missed. She went down. The water hit her face, and the cold of it was a shock, and she was already calculating. Not panicking, calculating, because that was how she was built. Which direction was up and how fast the current was moving when his hand caught her arm. Not her wrist. Her arm, both hands with the full grip of a man who is not letting go. He pulled her up. She broke the surface coughing, and he had her solid and completely certain, one hand on her arm and one on her shoulder, and he walked her back toward the bank with the focused determination of someone who had stopped thinking about anything except getting her out of the water. They collapsed on this bank together. The sheep was 20 feet away, wet and furious, already looking for something to eat. The creek ran past them, indifferent. The morning was bright and hot and smelled like mud and wet grass. Caroline sat up and coughed. Nathaniel sat beside her, breathing hard, his shirt soaked through and his hair plastered flat. They were both covered in creek mud from the chest down. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She was taking inventory Knee's arms, the wrist she had grabbed the branch with. "Nothing serious." "You?" "No." A pause. "You went in head first." "I lost my footing." "I saw. You caught me." "I saw that too." He said it simply, without performance. Just two people accounting for what had happened. She was very aware suddenly of how close they were on the bank, close enough that she could hear him breathing, close enough that when he turned to look at her, there was almost no distance at all. She was also aware that her hair was completely undone, and she was sitting in mud in a ruined dress, and she could not bring herself to care about any of it, which was in itself a kind of information. "The sheep is fine," she said. "The sheep is fine," he agreed. A beat. "I had it under control," he said, but there was no conviction in it. He was saying it the way people say things they know aren't true because they need to say something. She looked at him sideways. "You were 6 seconds from going under." "4," he said. "I had at least 4. Something happened to her face then. She tried to stop it and failed." A laugh, short and genuine, surprised out of her by the sheer absurdity of the number, by the absolute seriousness with which he said it. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, but it was too late. He stared at her. And then slowly, like a door that had been locked a long time and was finding its hinges, he smiled. A real one. Not the polished county function version. The actual one, which was warmer than she expected, and reached his eyes. They sat like that for a moment. Two mud-covered people on a creek bank in the July heat, with a rescued sheep and a ruined set of clothes between them, and no titles, and no money, and no history. Just two people who had pulled each other out of the water and were sitting with the strange lightness that comes after fear passes through. "Nathaniel," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You called me by my name," he said. "In the water. You said, 'Give me your hand, Nathaniel.'" She remembered it exactly. She had not thought about it at the time. It had come out the way things come out in emergencies from whatever place in a person sits below manners and calculation. "I did." "Yes." The silence between them was completely different from every silence before it. Not hostile, not watchful. Something open and a little fragile, the way things are when they are new. "Caroline," she said. It was not an explanation. It was not a concession. It was just her name offered back because he had given his, and she understood what that meant. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, stripped of the studied certainty he usually wore, genuinely unguarded, processing something he had not prepared for. "We should get you back to the house," he said finally. "You're going to catch cold. It's July. It's creek water in July." He stood. He held out his hand. She took it. He pulled her up. He did not let go immediately, just held on one moment longer than necessary, the way you hold on to something when you're making sure it's really there. And then he did, and they walked back up the bank together in the summer heat with mud on their boots, and a sheep following 12 feet behind them with the air of an animal that had decided to be someone else's problem. Hiram met them at the boundary gate with the expression of a man who was going to have a great deal to say about this later, but was choosing to say none of it now. "Hot water," Caroline told him. "And dry clothes, please." "Yes, miss," he said. He looked at Nathaniel. "Sir." "Much obliged," Nathaniel said. He stayed while she changed in the parlor at her insistence, because she was not going to send a man who had just pulled her out of a creek back across a muddy field in wet clothes. Hiram produced dry things from a trunk that had belonged to the previous owner, a set of working clothes that were slightly too short in the leg, and which Nathaniel accepted with a dignity that she found genuinely admirable. She came back downstairs in dry clothes with her hair still loose. She had not taken the time to pin it properly, and found him at the parlor window, looking out over the south field, with his hands in his pockets, and an expression of someone who is thinking carefully about something. He heard her come in and turned. His face did the thing again, that unguarded thing, that slight opening when he saw her. She watched it happen and did not look away. "Better," he said. "Much." She sat in the chair by the desk. He remained standing, which was less formality than habit. "Your tenant family, the Pratts, is it with the East pasture sheep?" "Hiram Pratt, yes." "Send him word the sheep is fine and on your property. He'll worry otherwise." Nathaniel looked at her with an expression that had in it the particular quality of a man who keeps being surprised by someone and has started to find it something other than inconvenient. "You know my tenant farmers by name." "I know everyone along this road by name," she said. It seemed sensible. "Most landowners don't. Most landowners," she said carefully, "were born knowing they belonged here, and never thought too much about the people who made it work." She said it without accusation. Just an observation stated plainly the way she stated most things. He absorbed it. He did not flinch from it, which she noted. "My father knew their names," he said finally. His father didn't bother. A pause. "I know them. I just haven't always acted like I did." "That's something you can change," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't pull your punches," he said. "I find they're more useful that way." "Most people are kinder." "Most people are more comfortable," she corrected. "That isn't always the same thing." He sat down then, not across from her, but at an angle, the way people sit when they are settling in rather than paying a call, and they talked for another hour. Not about property or repairs or road agreements, about real things. About his father and the estate and the particular weight of inheriting something that was beautiful and broken at the same time. About her father and the docks, and what it cost a man to build something from nothing, and what it cost his daughter to prove she was worth the building. About what Virginia had been when they were young, and what it was becoming, and what that meant for both of them. She did not tell him she knew about the debt. Not yet. That conversation had a time, and this was not it. But she sat in her parlor in the July heat with her hair loose and her boots still faintly damp, and she talked to Nathaniel Ashford the way she had not talked to anyone in a long time. Honestly, directly, without performance. And she watched him do the same, and she thought, this is a person, not the name, not the pride. A person with a real love of the land, and a real terror of losing it, and a real capacity for something better than what he showed the world. He left in the late afternoon. She walked him to the gate herself, which was not necessary, and they both knew it. At the gate he paused. He looked at her with the full attention she was starting to recognize as specific to her, not the evaluating look from the ball, but something more deliberate, more honest. "Caroline," he said. Just her name. the way she had offered it on the creek bank. "Nathaniel," she said back. He nodded once. He walked back toward Ashford Hall in the long late light, and she stood at the gate and watched him until the tree line took him. Behind her, Hiram said from a respectful distance, "The well readings are in, miss, when you're ready." "Give me a minute, Hiram." "Of course, miss." She stood at the gate 1 minute longer. The summer evening settled around her warm and full of crickets and the smell of the creek and the distant hammering from the last crew finishing the north fence. She thought something is happening here that cannot be undone. She thought, I'm not sure I want to undo it. She went in to look at the well readings, and she was steady and practical and focused on the numbers, and she did not think about the way he had held her arm in the creek, or the way her name had sounded in his voice, until much later when the house was quiet and the lantern was burning low, and even then, she only thought about it for a moment before she made herself stop. She was not a woman who got ahead of herself, but she was also not a woman who lied to herself, and she knew with the same clarity she brought to ledgers and property surveys and structural assessments that the careful distance she had maintained between herself and Nathaniel Ashford had become considerably harder to maintain. And somewhere across the boundary line in the old house with the portrait in the front hall and the debt in the account books and the east fields. He loved more than his own name. She suspected he was thinking something very similar. What neither of them knew yet was that Crowell had seen them on the creek bank. He had been riding the county road on his morning inspection, which was what he called it, though it was mainly surveillance, and he had paused at the rise above the creek crossing and watched the whole thing. The sheep, the water, the pulling out, the walk back. The hour and more that Nathaniel Ashford's horse stayed tied at the Hawthorne Ridge gate. He had watched all of it with the careful attention of a man collecting materials. And by Sunday, he was already deciding how to use them. Crowell moved on Sunday, as she had suspected he would. He did not file another complaint. Aldridge had made his opinion of the first one clear enough that Crowell understood a second would cost him credibility he was not ready to spend. Instead, he did what he did best. He talked. He talked at the church steps after morning service in the particular unhurried way of a man who has all the time in the world and wants you to know it. He talked at the county magistrate's supper on Tuesday evening. He talked in the feed store and the lumber merchant and every other place where the county's social architecture assembled itself and listened. What he said was not a lie exactly. That was the art of it. He said that he had observed with some concern, mind you only concern, that young Ashford had been spending considerable time at the Whitaker property. That a man of Ashford's standing ought to be careful about the appearances such associations created. That Baltimore money had a way of attaching itself to old names in ways that were not always. He would pause here with the practiced hesitation of a surgeon making an incision, entirely dignified. He did not say anything direct. He never did. He simply arranged the words so that everyone in earshot could draw their own conclusions, and their conclusions were exactly what he intended. By Wednesday, Caroline had heard it 3 separate times from 3 separate people. By Wednesday evening, she had also heard something else. Margaret Holt came to the Hawthorne Ridge gate at dusk, which was unusual. Margaret was not a woman who made social calls without a reason, and the reason she gave Hiram at the gate was that she had something Miss Whitaker needed to know. Caroline came out herself and found Margaret standing straight-backed and tight-jawed, with the look of a woman who has decided to say something difficult and is not going to be talked out of it. Mr. Crowell went to Mr. Aldridge again, Margaret said without preamble. Not a complaint this time, a petition. Caroline went still. What kind of petition? Signed by 4 county landowners. Margaret's voice was even controlled. Saying that a single woman operating a working estate without a male guardian or husband is contrary to the established order of the county, and asking the magistrate to review the terms of the Hawthorne Ridge deed transfer. The silence that followed was the kind that had a shape to it. He's trying to take the property, Caroline said. He's trying to force you into a position where you have to get married or get out. Margaret paused. Or fight. Who signed it? Margaret named 4 men. Caroline knew all of them too. She had never had dealings with one who had been polite to her face twice and apparently less polite behind her back, and one whose name genuinely surprised her because she had thought him a fair man. "Thank you," Caroline said. "Margaret, thank you for coming." "I came because my husband's roof still needs proper fixing," Margaret said. "And because you're the only person in this county who's done a single useful thing since April, and I am not going to stand on the wall and watch Elias Crowell run you off the same way he ran off the Hargrove widow in 1809. She stopped, straightened further. "He's done this before, miss. He picks a target and he grinds them down. Most people don't have the resources to fight him." "I do," Caroline said quietly. "I know." Margaret held her gaze. "That's why I came." She left. Caroline went inside and stood in the kitchen for a long moment and thought with a precision that her anger was actually useful for when she let it move through the channels it belonged in. Crowell was not wrong that she was vulnerable. Not because the petition had legal merit, it didn't, and she knew it didn't, and a good solicitor would dismantle it in a week. He was right that it would cost her time and money and sustained attention, and that while she was fighting it, he would keep talking, and the talk would do its work on her reputation, the way water does its work on stone. Not all at once, but continuously patiently wearing away at the surface, until something gave. She needed the petition answered before it gathered momentum. She needed it answered publicly by someone the county would listen to, and she needed it answered fast. She picked up her pen. She wrote to her father's solicitor first. Then she wrote a second letter, sealed it, and called Hiram. "Get this to Ashford Hall tonight," she said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight." Hiram looked at the letter and looked at her and said, "Yes, miss," with the tone of a man who understood that the evening had taken a serious turn. She did not sleep well. She had known she would not. She lay awake and ran through the legal architecture of the petition, identifying each weak point. And there were many, because Crowell was a social operator, not a legal one, and his petition had the structure of a grudge dressed as a principle. She ran through the names of the men who had signed it, and what she knew about each of them, and what that knowledge was worth. She ran through the things Margaret had told her about the Hargrove widow in 1809, and she felt a cold, specific anger that was not about herself, but about the pattern about how many times this particular kind of power had been used on this particular kind of woman, and how rarely it had been stopped. By 3 in the morning, she had a plan. By 7, she had drafted the framework of a counter-petition. At 8 o'clock, she heard a horse at the gate. She came out to find Nathaniel dismounting with the look of a man who had read her letter twice and ridden over without finishing his breakfast. His expression was not the careful managed thing he usually showed in public. It was direct and a little tight around the edges the way faces get when someone is angry on another person's behalf. "Show me the petition," he said. She handed him the copy she had requested from Aldridge's office. She had sent a boy first thing in the morning. He read it standing in her front yard, and she watched his face while he read it, and saw the moment when he understood exactly what Crowell was doing. "He's trying to take your property," Nathaniel said. "He's trying to force me out of the county," she said. "Taking the property is just the mechanism. 4 men signed this. He named them. She confirmed them." He looked at her with an expression that was doing several things at once. "I know 2 of them well. They signed this because Crowell asked them to, not because they believe it. Can you reach them?" "Before Sunday, yes." He folded the copy and held it. "This won't stand up to legal scrutiny. It doesn't need to. It just needs to cost me enough time and reputation that I can't hold the property." She looked at him steadily. "I've seen this before. Not to me personally, but I've watched it be done." He held her gaze. "What do you need?" 3 words, clean and direct. She had not been sure until he said them exactly how much she had been hoping he would. "A counter-petition," she said, "signed by enough credible county names that Aldridge can dismiss this without political cost to himself, and someone to stand in front of the county and say publicly what this is." "I'll sign it," he said immediately. "And I'll get you 6 more names by Friday, men whose signatures matter to Aldridge." "That's not enough by itself," she said. "Crowell's going to say you signed it because—" She stopped. He looked at her. He knew what she was going to say. Because we were seen at the creek. Yes. The air between them held that for a moment. Then let him say it, Nathaniel said. Let him say whatever he likes. I am going to stand in front of this county and tell the truth about what has happened here, and if Crowell wants to make implications about my reasons, I will deal with that too. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the ball and the whisper and the curtsy. She thought about the cleared road and the barn beam and the creek and her name in his voice on a summer afternoon in her parlor. She thought about all of it as evidence, not of romance, not yet, but of a man who had been wrong and was in the sustained, difficult work of being right about it. All right, she said. He was gone within the hour. He moved fast when he decided to move. She had noticed that about him, that the same decisiveness that had made him arrogant before was directed properly, actually useful. He came back Friday with 7 signatures on a single sheet of paper and a meeting scheduled with Aldridge for Saturday morning. Caroline came to the meeting. She had not been invited. It was technically a meeting between Aldridge and the counter-petitioners, but she walked in and sat down, and Nathaniel looked at her and did not say a word about it, and Aldridge, who by this point had strong feelings about the amount of paperwork this county had generated in the past 2 months, simply acknowledged her and continued. The counter-petition was presented. The legal inadequacies of Crowell's petition were laid out clearly and briefly by Caroline's solicitor, who had made the ride from Baltimore in 2 days. Aldridge listened. He asked 2 questions. He said he would have a response by Monday. On the way out, one of the signatories, a man named Garrett, 60 years old, who had owned land in the county for 40 years, and had the particular authority of someone who had earned it through longevity and fairness, stopped Caroline in the hallway. Miss Whitaker, he said, your father built his company from a dock in Baltimore. Yes, sir, she said. My father built this farm from a cleared field. He looked at her steadily. I didn't sign that counter-petition because Ashford asked me. I signed it because what Crowell did was wrong, and I'm old enough to have stopped caring about the cost of saying so. He nodded once. That's all. He walked on. She stood in the hallway of the county magistrate's office and felt something move through her that she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time, something that was not pride exactly, but was adjacent to it. The feeling of being seen accurately and finding it was survivable. Nathaniel was waiting outside. Garrett talked to you, he said. Yes. He's a good man. He looked at her with the careful attention she had come to recognize. How are you? It was a simple question. She was not used to simple questions that meant something. I'm all right, she said. Then, because honesty mattered more than composure, I'm tired. I have been building something here and fighting for the right to build it at the same time, and it is wearing. He was quiet for a moment. I know. You don't. I've been fighting for the right to keep something, he said, for 3 years, without telling anyone how bad it actually was because I was afraid of what the telling would cost me. He looked down the street, then back at her. That's wearing too, in a different direction. This was as close as he had come to saying it directly. She held the moment carefully. Nathaniel, she said, I know about the debt. His face went still. I overheard a conversation at the lumber merchant a month ago, she said. I wasn't trying to, but I heard the figures, and I have been thinking about it since then. The stillness in his face was the kind that preceded either closing down or opening up, and she could not tell yet which way it was going to go. You didn't say anything, he said. It wasn't my place to say it before you were ready. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, something shorter and more rueful. Know your place, he said quietly. And then lower, Lord, I said that to you. You did. And you've spent 2 months working, she said. Same as I would have anyway. The insult didn't change the plan. It just clarified the location. He looked at her with the full weight of his attention. All of it undivided, the kind of looking that meant he had stopped managing the conversation and was simply present in it. The payment is due in October, he said. A large one. If I can't meet it, I have to sell the East Woodland 400 acres. And if I sell that, the eastern tenant farms lose their windbreak and their water access, and 3 families lose viable farmland within 2 years. He said it evenly, the way you say things you have rehearsed in private 100 times. I've been trying to find a buyer who would give me terms. There isn't one. I know, she said. I looked. He stared at her. You looked. I asked my father's solicitor to review what was available 3 weeks ago. She met his eyes steadily. Because I was trying to decide if there was a solution that didn't require you to lose the woodland. The silence that followed was long and full. Why? He said. And there was the word again, that single, flat word with everything inside it. She thought about how to answer honestly. Because your tenants would suffer for it, she said. Because the land is worth saving. Because... She stopped, steadied herself. Because you went to Aldridge's office on a Saturday morning when you didn't have to, and I have not forgotten that. He sat down on the bench outside the magistrate's office. Just sat down suddenly, like the weight of the last 3 years had decided it was done, being carried, standing up. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for one moment, brief, private, honest, and then he looked up. What did you find? He said. When you looked. She sat beside him. She told him. She told. She had found a structure her father's solicitor had helped build it that could work. Whitaker Shipping would advance funds to retire the October payment and the 2 that followed. Ashford Hall's Eastern Timber would supply Whitaker ships on a contract that paid above current market rate, which was fair because Ashford Timber was good and her father's company needed reliable supply. The profits from the first 2 years of the contract would go toward repaying the advance. After that, the arrangement became a standard trade partnership. The eastern woodland stayed whole. The tenant farms kept their water access. The debt stopped compounding. Nathaniel listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. You built this before you knew if I would accept it, he said. I built it because it was the right structure, she said. Whether you accept it is your decision. This is Caroline. This is a significant amount of money. My father's company can carry it. The timber contract makes it profitable within 3 years. It's not charity. She looked at him steadily. It's a business arrangement that happens to also be the right thing. He looked at her. His expression was the most open she had seen it, fully stripped of the county ball version of himself, the proud landholder version, the version that had whispered, "Know your place" in a crowded ballroom, and believed it. What was left underneath was just a man who was 32 years old and had been carrying something too heavy alone for too long. Why would you do this? He said. After what I said to you. Because spite is too cold a foundation to build anything on, she said. I figured that out somewhere around the 2nd week of July. He looked at her, and she looked back, and the summer afternoon held the minute warm and honest and still. I need to tell you something, he said. All right. I insulted you at that ball because you frightened me. He said it without embellishment. Not you specifically. What you represented. A woman who knew more about my estate than I'd admitted to myself. Who could walk into a room and see the rot under the paint before I'd finished pretending it wasn't there. A pause. I said what I said because I didn't know what else to do with that. I know, she said. That doesn't make it... No, she agreed. It doesn't. But understanding a thing is different from excusing it. I understand it. Can you forgive it? She looked at him for a long moment. I'm sitting on this bench with you, she said. I think that's its own answer. Something shifted in his face, a release, a settling something that had been held tight, finally letting go. He straightened. He looked at her with the direct attention she had come to value more than she'd expected. I'll accept the partnership, he said. On one condition. She waited. The terms go to both solicitors for review, he said. I want it structured properly. No corners cut because we know each other. Clean contract, fair terms, both parties protected. Of course, she said. And, he stopped. And I would like to call on you, he said. Properly. not about property or road agreements or barn beams. He held her gaze. "I would like to come to your door and ask if you'll walk with me, and I would like it to have nothing to do with business." She felt the steadiness of it, not a sweep, not a performance. Just a man asking directly because he had learned to ask directly from watching her do it. "Thursday evening," she said, "after the accounts are done." "Thursday," he said. They stood. They walked in separate directions, him toward his horse, her toward her solicitor's office 2 doors down. At the corner, she turned back because something in her wanted the last look. He had turned back too. They stood like that for one moment across the street. The kind of moment that does not need words because it is already complete, and then they both turned and went on about their work. Monday. Aldridge dismissed the petition in full. He sent Crowell a formal letter stating that the complaint lacked legal foundation, and that any future submissions of a similar nature would be subject to review for misuse of the magistrate's process. Crowell received his letter on Tuesday. Caroline heard about it from Hiram, who heard it from the postboy, who had been present when it was delivered and had noted with great satisfaction that Crowell had read it twice on his front step and gone inside without speaking. She allowed herself a full minute of quiet satisfaction. Then she went back to the accounts. Wednesday, she met with her solicitor and Nathaniel's solicitor together at the county clerk's office. The partnership framework was laid out. Both solicitors raised their respective concerns, hers about payment timing, his about timber volume guarantees, and the adjustments were made with the business-like efficiency of people who were trying to build something that would last. It took 4 hours. By the end, both solicitors agreed the structure was sound. Walking out, Nathaniel said, "Your solicitor is formidable." "He learned from my father," she said. "Your father must be something." "He's the best person I know," she said, simply without decoration. "I hope you'll meet him." Nathaniel looked at her as they walked. "I'd like that. He'll ask you hard questions." "I'd expect nothing less." She smiled. Not the controlled half-smile she gave the county, but a real one, the kind that reached her eyes and didn't ask permission. He saw it and held on to it. She could tell the way you hold on to something you've been waiting for. Thursday came. The accounts got done. There was a knock at the gate at 7 in the evening, and Caroline, who had told herself 3 times that afternoon that she was not thinking about it, had been ready since 6:45. She went to the gate herself. He was standing there with his hat in his hand and the particular expression of a man who had rehearsed being calm and mostly achieved it. "Miss Whittaker," he said. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Then Nathaniel. Caroline. The warmth in it was real. "Would you walk with me?" She stepped through the gate. They walked the boundary line together in the long July evening. The shared wall running beside them. The fields on both sides full and green and alive with the sounds of summer settling toward dark. They talked, and this time there was nothing guarded in it. No testing, no managing, no careful accounting of what was safe to say. They talked the way people talk when they have stopped performing for each other. She told him about the morning she had bought Hawthorne Ridge awake at 2 in the morning with a lantern and a map, and he laughed genuinely fully. The laugh of a man who could by now find the audacity of it wonderful, rather than threatening. He told her about the first time he had understood the estate was in serious trouble, a letter from his father's solicitor 6 months after the funeral that he had read 4 times in disbelief and then locked in a drawer because he had not known what else to do with the information. She did not laugh, but she pressed her hand briefly against his arm and he went still for a moment and then continued. They walked until the light was almost gone, and the fireflies had come up in the long grass along the wall. At the gate they stopped. He looked at her with the full weight of everything they had been through since the ball. The insult and the curtsy, and the wagons, and the mud, and the creek, and the barn beam, and the petition, and the 4 hours in the clerk's office, and this walk, and all the small moments in between, that had added up, without either of them planning it into something that was undeniably real. "I have been a proud fool," he said. "You have been," she agreed. "You're getting better." The corner of his mouth moved. "High praise." "From me," she said. "It actually is." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he reached out and touched her hand, just his fingers against the back of her hand, a gesture that was not grand, but was entirely honest. "Good night, Caroline," he said. "Good night, Nathaniel." He walked back toward Ashford Hall in the dark. She stood at her gate until she could no longer hear his footsteps. Then she went inside and she sat at her desk and she did not open the accounts. She just sat and she let herself feel the whole full weight of the summer. Everything she had built and fought for and refused to surrender, and she thought that she had come to Virginia to prove a man wrong, and somewhere in the proving, she had found something she had not expected, which was this, a person worth the fight. Not the estate. Not the victory. The person. She thought about her father's letter. The people who talk the most are usually the ones doing the least. She thought he was right as usual. And she thought, I am not done building. But I think for the first time, I am not building alone. In the front hall of Ashford Hall, Nathaniel stood before the portrait of his grandfather, the one with the coat and the land records, and the expression of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged. And he said quietly, and to no one, "She's better than all of us." Then he went to his desk and wrote a letter to Thomas Whitaker in Baltimore, formally requesting the opportunity to make his acquaintance. He sealed it and set it with the Morning Post. Then he sat back in his chair in the lamplight and thought about a woman who had bought the estate beside his to prove him wrong, and had then spent a summer proving something considerably more important than that, and he felt the kind of feeling that comes when you have been wrong about something in a way that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. The letter went out with the Morning Post. Thomas Whitaker received it on Friday. He read it at his desk in Baltimore, his rough dock worker's hands holding the paper carefully, his steady eyes moving through every line twice. Then he folded it, put it in his coat pocket, and walked to his shipping office, where his head clerk met him at the door and said, "Good morning, sir." And Thomas Whitaker said, "Clear my schedule for next week," and walked through without stopping. He was going to Virginia. Thomas Whitaker arrived on a Wednesday. He came the way he did everything, without announcement, without ceremony, in a plain traveling coat, with road dust on his boots, and a leather satchel that contained, Caroline knew, his personal account ledgers, 2 changes of clothes, and a copy of the Virginia property statutes he had purchased in Baltimore before departure. He did not send a letter ahead. He simply appeared at the Hawthorne Ridge gate on Wednesday morning, and when Hiram opened it and saw who was standing there, he broke into the first full smile Caroline had witnessed from him all summer. She came out of the house and walked to him fast, and Thomas Whitaker opened his arms and held his daughter, the way fathers hold daughters when they have been apart long enough to feel it fully, without reserve, with the specific tenderness of a man who had worked every day of his adult life, so that she would never have to apologize for existing in a room. "You look well," he said into her hair. "You look tired," she said into his coat. "Long road." He pulled back and held her by the shoulders, and looked at her with his steady eyes. Really looked the way he had always been able to, reading her the way he read a ledger, finding the thing under the surface. "You look more than well. You look like yourself." She understood what he meant. She felt like herself, more than she had in years maybe. The summer had cost her the work, the fighting, the long evenings alone with the accounts, and the loneliness she would not have admitted to, but it had also given her something that was harder to name and more durable than anything she could have purchased or planned for. "Come inside," she said. "I'll have Hiram make coffee." "God help us," Thomas said, and she laughed. He spent the first hour walking the property. She took him herself, the repaired roof, the new well, the north fencing, the replanted orchards, the tenant cottages that were now weather-tight and occupied by families who had stayed because the land was viable again. He asked precise questions, and she gave precise answers, and he listened, the way he had always listened, which was completely. At the east boundary he stopped and looked through the tree line toward Ashford Hall. "Show me the barn," he said. She showed him. He walked the repaired beam himself, ran his hand along the joint, checked the support structure with the eye of a man who had grown up in buildings that could not afford to fail. He said nothing for a long moment. "Good work," he said finally. "My foreman's work," she said. "Your foreman did what you directed. He turned and looked at her. You directed it right. A pause. This is Ashford's barn. Yes. And Ashford knows you ordered this repair. He does. He paid for it. She held her father's gaze. Fairly. At cost. Thomas nodded slowly. Tell me about him. She told him. All of it, the ball, the insult, the curtsy, the property map at 2 a.m, the wagons and the shared road, and the oak tree, and the complaint petition, and the creek and the barn, and the solicitor meetings, and the Thursday evening walks. She told it in order without dramatizing and without diminishing, because her father deserved the accurate version, and she had never been able to give him anything else. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the east field held them both in a long silence. He said that to you, Thomas said. His voice was even. At the ball. He did. And you curtsied. I did. That's your mother in you, he said quietly. She would have done exactly the same thing. He looked out at the tree line. And then you bought the property. That's you and me, she said. He looked at her sideways, and something moved across his face that was grief and pride. At the same time, the particular expression of a parent who sees themselves in their child and understands that the best and most painful thing they ever did was raise someone who didn't need them anymore. Is he a good man? Thomas said. He's becoming one, she said carefully. He was not entirely when the summer started. He has been doing the work of it. A pause. Honestly, without being asked twice. That counts for something. It counts for a great deal, she said. In my experience. Thomas was quiet for another moment. Then, he wrote me a formal letter. I know. Very correct. Good handwriting. Asked for the opportunity to make my acquaintance. He looked at her steadily. Did you tell him to write it? No. Did you suggest it? No. So he did it himself. He did it himself, she said. Thomas nodded once the way he nodded when a column of figures came out correctly. All right, he said. I'll meet him. She arranged it for Friday. Not a formal dinner, she was not interested in formality for its own sake, and neither she suspected was Nathaniel at this point. A supper at Hawthorne Ridge, the three of them, with Hiram's cooking, and the good candlesticks, and no audience. Nathaniel arrived at 6 exactly. He had dressed carefully, which she noted not lavishly, but with the specific care of a man who understood that he was walking into an assessment and had decided to meet it honestly rather than impressively. He had his hat in his hand at the gate. His boots were clean. His expression when Hiram showed him into the parlor, where Thomas Whitaker was standing with a glass of cider and 30 years of dock work behind his eyes, was composed and direct and entirely unperformed. Mr. Whitaker, he said, I'm grateful you made the journey. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, the full, unsparing look that had made contract negotiators in Baltimore genuinely uncomfortable. Mr. Ashford, he said, I've heard a great deal about you. I expect you have, Nathaniel said. I imagine not all of it was flattering. Some of it was not, Thomas agreed pleasantly. Sit down. They sat. Caroline sat between them and said almost nothing for the first 30 minutes, because she understood that this was not her conversation to manage. She watched her father do what he did best. Ask questions that seemed simple and were not listening to not just the answers but the space around them, the hesitations, the choices. He asked about the estate. Nathaniel answered without pretending the financial situation was better than it was. He asked about the tenants. Nathaniel named them all, every family on the property, and said something specific about each one, and Caroline watched her father's expression shift by a fraction. He asked about the ball. Nathaniel went still for one moment. Then he said, I said something to your daughter that I would take back if I could. I can't. What I can do is make sure that every action I have taken since then is in the opposite direction and intend to keep doing so. A pause. She did not need my apology to succeed here. She has made that clear, but I offer it anyway because it is owed to her and to you. Thomas looked at him for a long time. "She didn't cry," he said finally. "No," Nathaniel said. "She didn't." "Do you know why?" Nathaniel looked across the table at Caroline with an expression that was so honest she almost looked away. "Because she had already decided what she was going to do," he said, "and crying would have cost her time she didn't have." Thomas was quiet. Then he picked up his glass and said, "Tell me about the timber contract." The supper lasted 3 hours. By the end, Thomas had reviewed the partnership framework with the same surgical attention he brought to all documents, asked 11 questions that Caroline's solicitor had not thought to ask, and proposed 2 amendments that were, she acknowledged, privately improvements. Nathaniel accepted both, without argument. When Nathaniel left that evening, Thomas stood at the gate and watched him go, and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "He loves that land." "He does," Caroline said. "Reminds me of something." He looked at her. "The way I love the harbor." A pause. "A man who loves the thing he's responsible for tends to be responsible for it well, eventually." "That's been my observation," she said. "He'll need to keep doing the work," Thomas said. "The becoming. That doesn't stop." "I know. You'll tell him that." "I already have." She looked at her father in the late evening light. Several times. He nodded. He put his arm around her shoulders briefly, the way he had since she was small, and then dropped it and straightened and said practically, "Your solicitor's amendment to the payment timing is sound. Make sure it's in the final draft." "It's already in," she said. He looked sideways at her. "Of course it is." And there it was, the thing she had been waiting for without knowing it, the quiet satisfaction of a father who built something and watched it surpass him. "Good girl," he said. "I mean that." She heard what he meant. He left Saturday morning early the way he had arrived, road dust and a leather satchel, and no ceremony. He held her at the gate for a moment and said into her hair, "Your mother would have been so proud." And she pressed her face against his coat and did not speak. He got into the carriage. She watched it go until it turned the county road and was gone. Then she went inside and opened the accounts, because the accounts did not wait for sentiment, and because working was how she loved things, by staying by, building by continuing. The county assembly was the last Saturday of July. It was the kind of event that the county used to mark the end of summer's heaviest work, a gathering at the church hall open to all landowners and their households, where the season's business was reviewed. Disputes could be aired before the magistrate, and the social architecture of the county reassembled itself publicly after the long dispersed weeks of harvest preparation. Caroline had not intended to attend. She had in fact told Hiram on Friday evening that she did not see the purpose of sitting in a room with people who had spent 3 months deciding how to feel about her. Hiram had said with the measured patience he deployed when he thought she was wrong, "With respect, Miss Not Attending gives those people exactly what they want, which is the room without you in it." She had looked at him. He had looked back. She wore her best dress. Not the silk from the ball that was the dress she had worn when she believed she had something to prove to the county's opinion. This was a different dress, simpler and well-made, the dress of a woman who had stopped auditioning. She arrived on time. She took a seat near the center of the room. She kept her expression pleasant and her posture easy, and she greeted the people who greeted her with the same natural directness she brought to everything. Nathaniel was already there. He found her eyes when she came in and held them for a moment, just a nod, just a look, but with everything the summer had built in it, and she nodded back. Crowell was there too. He was near the front, in his usual position, close enough to the magistrate's table to suggest authority, surrounded by the 2 or 3 men who still orbited him out of habit or self-interest. He did not look at Caroline when she came in. That careful non-looking was its own kind of statement. The assembly proceeded through its formal business road maintenance agreements, boundary disputes, harvest schedules, the quarterly accounting of county funds. Caroline listened and contributed twice, briefly and usefully, and both times was heard without interruption by men who had learned over the summer that her contributions tended to be accurate. Then Crowell stood. He did it with the practiced ease of a man who had been waiting for his moment. He asked for the floor, and Aldridge gave it to him, and he turned to face the room with the expression of benevolent concern he had been wearing since June. "I want to raise," he said, "the matter of community standards, the matter of what this county stands for, and what kind of example we are setting for the families who have built their lives here." He paused. Let the room settle. "We have seen this summer a significant disruption to the established order of this county. Commercial activity conducted on residential estates. A young woman alone, unchaperoned, managing male workers and conducting business negotiations that ought by any proper measure to be handled by a father or husband or legal guardian." Another pause, longer this time. "I raise this not out of personal animus, but out of genuine concern for the standards that have made this county what it is. Standards that have been earned by generations of honorable men who built something worth protecting." The room was quiet, the careful watching quiet of people deciding which way to lean. Caroline felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the one she had felt at the ball, the one that meant she was being categorized and dismissed and made small in public, and that the people watching were waiting to see if she would accept the categorization. She did not stand. Not yet. Because Nathaniel Ashford stood first. He stood without hurrying. He did not ask for the floor. He simply rose, and the room gave it to him the way rooms give things to men who have earned their authority through presence rather than position. And when he spoke to the whole room, not to Crowell. "I want to respond to that," he said. Crowell turned. His expression managed to remain pleasant through what was clearly significant effort. "Miss Whitaker," Nathaniel said, "has done more for the working life of this county in 4 months than this assembly has done in 4 years. She repaired the shared road at her own cost. She stabilized a barn that would have cost 3 tenant families their winter grain. She improved tenant cottages that had been in disrepair for 2 winters. She filed a counterpetition that correctly identified a misuse of the magistrate's process." He looked at Crowell directly. "And she did all of it while being complained about, gossiped about, and formally challenged by a man who has not repaired a single fence post or graded a single road in the entire time I have known him." The room did not go silent. It went different. A shift in attention, a change in pressure, the feeling of a space reassembling around a new center of gravity. "The only thing Miss Whitaker has disrupted," Nathaniel continued, "is the comfortable assumption that a name is the same thing as character. That inheritance is the same thing as worth. That a woman working with intelligence and integrity is somehow less dignified than a man talking about dignity without demonstrating any." He paused. "Let it land. I am ashamed that I once believed those things myself. I am more ashamed that I said so to her face in this county and called it breeding." The room was very still. "The established order Mr. Crowell is concerned about protecting," Nathaniel said, "is the order where men like him get to decide who belongs and who doesn't, and collect the social cost from anyone who challenges that. I have no interest in protecting that order. I have considerable interest in the order where a person's worth is measured by what they build and how they treat the people around them." He looked at Caroline. "By that measure, Miss Whitaker is the finest landowner in this county." He sat down. The room stayed still for 3 full seconds. Then Garrett, 60 years old, 40 years of property, the man who had signed the counter-petition because he was too old to care about the cost, said from his seat, "Hear, hear," in the flat, final tone of a man closing a discussion. 2 more voices followed, then 3. Crowell stood very straight in the front of the room, with his prepared expression still on his face, and nowhere left to put it. Aldridge, with the expression of a man who was done processing other people's grievances for the year, said, "Thank you, Mr. Ashford. Is there further business?" There was not further business. The assembly moved on. Afterward, people came to Caroline, not all of them, not the ones who had been Crowell's audience for 3 months, but enough. Garrett shook her hand again. Mrs. Willis brought her small daughter over and introduced her. 2 of the men who had originally signed Crowell's petition found reasons to cross the room and speak to her about road schedules and supply logistics, which was their way of offering a renegotiation without having to explicitly acknowledge the original choice. And she accepted it as such because she was practical and because she understood that rebuilding required allowing people to come back without too much ceremony. Crowell left early. She saw him go from across the room, still straight-backed, still wearing the expression, but with something underneath it that was smaller and less certain than before. She watched him go and felt no triumph exactly. More like the feeling of finishing a long piece of work and setting down the tools. Clean. Final. Nathaniel found her at the edge of the room when the assembly had thinned. "You didn't need that," he said. "No," she said. "I didn't. I had already won." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I said it because it was true, and because I wanted this room to hear it." "It was well said." She held his gaze. "The part about what you once believed." "I meant it." "I know you did. That's why it mattered." They walked out together. The evening was still warm, the end of July, carrying the last real heat of the season, the kind of night that smelled like cut grass and ripe orchards, and everything that summer had built without announcing it. At the point where the road divided her way to Hawthorne Ridge, his toward Ashford Hall, they stopped. He turned to face her. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the boundary wall." She looked at him. "The one at the east field. The one that runs between our properties, the collapsed section near the old oak." He held her eyes. "I've been thinking that we shouldn't rebuild it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a practical problem," she said. "Without the wall, the boundary is unmarked for 40 yards. "I know." A pause. "I was thinking we might not need it marked, if we were managing both properties together." She understood what he was saying. He was not saying it with grand gestures or borrowed language. He was saying it the way he said most important things now, which was directly and without performance, because she had taught him without intending to that honesty was more persuasive than theater. "That's a significant proposition," she said. "I'm aware. You'd be proposing that 2 properties, 2 operations, 2 estates be managed jointly. I'd be proposing," he said carefully, "that the 2 people who have been managing them jointly since May simply acknowledge that they've been doing it." She almost smiled. "You make it sound obvious." "It seems obvious to me." He took a breath. "Caroline, I am asking you to marry me. I am asking because I want to spend the rest of my life working beside someone who goes into a creek in July without taking her boots off first and tells me the truth and keeps better records than anyone I have ever met." He paused. "And because I love you." I have been trying to find the right time to say that, and I don't think there is a right time, so I'm saying it on a county road in the dark. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the ball, the whisper, the curtsy and the long walk out and the map at 2 in the morning. She thought about all the things she had built this summer and all the things she had not expected. Hiram's first smile, Margaret on the stone wall, her father's arms at the gate, Nathaniel's hands in a flooded creek, and his voice in a courtroom hallway saying, "What do you need?" and the feel of her name in his mouth when there was nothing left to perform. She thought, "I came here to prove something. I proved it." And then something better happened. "Yes," she said. He was still for one moment. Then something in his face that had been careful and braced released entirely, and he reached out and took both her hands in his, and it was the simplest and most honest gesture she had ever received. "Your father is going to have questions," he said. "He already sent them by post," she said. 8 of them. Very thorough. Nathaniel laughed, the full one, the real one. "Did you answer them?" "I forwarded them to you," she said. "They're at Ashford Hall." He stared at her. "When?" "This morning." She held his eyes with the particular expression she wore when she was 2 steps ahead. "I had a feeling the evening might go this way." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had come to love most, the one where he was caught between admiration and complete exasperation, and had accepted that this was simply the condition of knowing her. "You always know," he said. "I keep thorough records," she said. He brought her hands up and pressed them briefly warmly against his chest. Just that, just the gesture, full and honest and enough. "Then let's go answer your father's 8 questions," he said. 7, she corrected. "I already answered question 4. "Of course you did." He shook his head, still smiling. Shall we? They turned together and walked the road that ran between their properties, the road she had graded with her own workers, that he had helped clear of a fallen oak that had carried supply wagons and feed deliveries, and the ordinary traffic of lives that had become without either of them predicting it genuinely shared. The boundary wall's collapsed section was visible in the moonlight. As they passed it, 40 yards of open ground between two properties. No marker, no division. Just the land running through uninterrupted. Neither of them suggested rebuilding it. In the months that followed, the partnership contract was signed, witnessed, and filed with the county clerk. The October debt payment was met on time and in full. The eastern woodland stayed whole. The Pratt family, the Holt family, and the 4 other tenant households along the eastern boundary kept their water access and their farmland, and by the following spring, 2 of the cottages had new families in them, because word had gotten out that the Ashford-Whitaker operation paid fairly and maintained its buildings. Nathaniel wrote to Thomas Whitaker every month. Thomas wrote back shorter letters, practical, occasionally containing a single sentence that was about something else entirely. One letter in September said only, "She needs someone who can keep up with her. I think you might. Don't prove me wrong." Nathaniel pinned it above his desk. Caroline's father came back for the wedding in October, road dust and leather satchel, and no ceremony. He walked his daughter to the threshold of the church in Ashford's county, and gave her away to a man he had once decided to distrust, and found to his own quiet satisfaction that he had changed his mind. The wedding was small. The county assembly hall would have been too large and too full of people whose attendance was a social calculation rather than genuine feeling, and Caroline was not interested in that. The church held 40 people, the ones who had earned the invitation, which was a different count than the ones who would have expected it. Garrett was there. Margaret Holt was there with her daughter, who fell asleep in her mother's arms halfway through. Willis and his wife were there, and the wife had brought preserved peaches, which she pressed into Caroline's hands afterward, with a brief, fierce hug, and no words, which was better than words. Hiram stood in the back of the church and cried without attempting to conceal it, which surprised no one and moved everyone. Crowell was not there. He had left the county in August quietly without announcement, and taken a position in a northern district, where presumably he could reconstruct his authority from scratch, among people who did not yet know what he was. Caroline heard about it from Aldridge, who mentioned it with the neutral brevity of a man who had arrived at an opinion he was not going to state publicly. She filed it away, said nothing, let it be finished. After the ceremony, standing outside in the October afternoon, with her husband beside her and her father's hand briefly on her shoulder, and the whole long year behind her, Caroline thought about the ball. She thought about silk and breeding, and a cold whisper designed to make her feel small. She thought about the curtsy, the long, deliberate, perfect curtsy, and the walkout, and the lantern, and the map. She thought, I bought the estate next door to prove I belonged here. She looked at the field, at the tree line, at the open space where the boundary wall's collapsed section still stood unrepaired, 40 yards of land running between two properties, like a conversation that had decided to stop dividing and start connecting. She thought, I belong here. I built that, and nothing that was said to me in a ballroom in June could have taken it because it was never theirs to give. Nathaniel's hand found hers. She held it. Ready, he said. She looked at him, at the man who had been wrong about her and had done the long, unglamorous daily work of being right about it, who had stood in a county assembly and said the true thing at a cost to himself, who loved his land the way she loved her father's harbor, with the whole of himself and without apology. I've been ready, she said, since 2 a.m. on a night in June with a lantern and a map. He smiled. The real one. The one she had waited all summer to earn. They walked back toward the estates together, not his, not hers. Theirs. The boundary line ran beneath their feet and meant nothing. The land stretched out on both sides and meant everything. And Caroline Whitaker, who had been told once in a crowded room to know her place, had built her place